All right, week 2 of the 2024 NFL season is officially over, and we've already seen some massive dynasty player value swings over these last 2 weeks. Now's a great time to kind of be evaluating your team, who might be on the trading block, who in your league might be panicking and ready to sell some players you should be buying low. It's a really interesting time of year for fantasy. So for this video, what we're going to do, we're going to kick this off by going through a few different players at QB, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and giving you some of our biggest dynasty risers and fallers, and giving you some tips on maybe who you should target and how you can possibly get those players. So to kick things off, we'll be starting with our QBs. And our biggest riser at the QB position in Dynasty right now is Baker Mayfield. He's currently sitting as the QB1 right now. It's only been 2 weeks, but he's already scored 49.5 points. He's thrown 5 touchdowns this year so far, and he performed pretty well against a tough Lions defense too in week 2. If you look at this Bucs team, they're going to be right at the very top of the NFC, we think. They've looked really good. They have Mike Evans, they have Chris Godwin, they have decent running backs in Rashad White and Bucky Irving. Baker's in a great position. He's been fantastic ever since probably about the halfway point through last year, where he's been putting up on average over about 15, 16 fantasy points a game. I'm not sure many managers who have Baker Mayfield are selling him right now, but I think if you could go out there and you have a manager who thinks that this is just a fluke, or maybe they're willing to sell because they have other QBs at the position, if you can get him for like an early second, I think that's great value for him right now.
Yeah, I think Baker really stands out across the board as being very, very consistent in what you're going to get from him. And that's what separates any quarterback from any other quarterback in the league, because if you start him, you're almost guaranteed for like a 20-point game. And like you said, dating back to last year, he's been on a bit of a tear since the second half. And he really just hasn't looked back, which is why right now he's sitting at QB1. And this is a quarterback that in Dynasty or Redraft was going fairly late in most of those leagues. Usually maybe a QB2 that you're picking up. If you're super flex, he's definitely a QB2 that you're picking up. And it gives the advantage for the people that don't need to start him for someone to come in and potentially trade for him, or their other quarterback that they may have had in play if they have replaced that quarterback with Baker Mayfield. I think he is a sure sign example of someone getting off to a really good start, and I expect Tampa to keep doing the same thing.
Yeah, and the one thing too that people don't associate with Baker, but I think it's important to call out, is he does have a little bit of rushing upside for him too. He's already rushed for about 50 yards and a rushing touchdown so far this year. So he'll get you, 20, 30, yards a game, get you some of those extra fantasy points that could make a difference in those tighter matchups. For our second dynasty riser at the QB position, we went with Kyler Murray. Again, he started to pick up some hype at the end of the offseason here, kind of going into fantasy drafts as like a sleeper pick for a lot of people. But he has really lived up to some of those expectations. He's still incredibly mobile. He's been looking really good and accurate in the pocket as well with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. He's got the weapons around him. He's done well. I expect that to continue even more throughout the season as he kind of gets into some of these matchups here. His first matchup was against the Bills, obviously a little bit tougher opponent than most. But I would expect him to continue to trend in the upward direction there.
It's interesting for me going into the season because Kyler was someone that I had targeted in a lot of my leagues, and I unfortunately did not get him because it just did not fall that way for me. People seem to forget how good he was before he got hurt. Now, I know he missed a large chunk of time dating back into like 2022 into 2023, but his rookie season and his 2021 season, the dude was an absolute monster in terms of fantasy, which obviously parlays to the real world. You got to be doing something right to be putting up a good amount of fantasy points. And he was just really, really, really good. So it was really surprising to me that people weren't looking at him as much as you would think. I think people just kind of forgot about him. That and the Cardinals, I guess, really haven't really given him any reason to like excel as far as weapons. Like last year, all he had was Trey McBride when he came back as being a really good focal point. But now that they gave him Marvin Harrison Jr. and he's got Trey McBride still there, the team is coming together as far as an offense, and James Conner being there added into the offense. It's giving him weapons, which is only going to make him, I think, even more dangerous. And he's still young at 27. He's a really good target for anyone who can go and pick him up. It's just going to be really difficult, I think, to pick, because I think if you have him, you're going to be starting him now.
Yeah, no, his value is obviously skyrocketed. He's not going to be cheap to get. If you can, go for it. And again, I think people just devalued him because he was in a bad situation for so long, which most number one, overall QBs are typically when they come out. And the Cardinals have just been an absolute dumpster fire for a long time, and they finally have some weapons around him. I think he'll be good. And, like the whole work ethic thing and video game thing kind of dragged him down a little bit too, which seems to not really matter when you're playing very well.
Everyone plays video games. People need to get over it.
Yeah, and the next guy on our list for our first Dynasty Faller is probably a guy who watches a lot of film. He works really hard, and situation we kind of feel bad for. But it's Bryce Young. At this point, most people have heard the news that he's being benched for Andy Dalton. He's just not been good. They're already kind of discussing on like sports radio and talk shows, is he like the biggest bust of all time for how much they gave up to get him and how he's performed so far. I really hope that he can get a fresh start somewhere else outside of Carolina, because Carolina just seems to ruin every quarterback that comes in. Darnold looks way better. Baker looks way better. I know those weren't the starting spots for them, but just to be clear, like Carolina's an awful situation. It doesn't seem like it's any better. Their O-line, their weapons, there's just nothing there that's going to help a young QB. Mm-hmm. And his confidence is just shattered at this point, it seems like, when he's playing. So hopefully he gets a fresh start elsewhere and can pick it back up like some of these guys who we've mentioned with late year or late career resurgences. But for now, he's barely rosterable.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation for him. Like I said in our last video, I'm not completely sold that he's a bust at this point. I think people are jumping to conclusions way too fast for something like this. But it's a fast market, and that's part of what we deal with now in 2024. You're going to get judged very, very quickly. I find it hard to believe that he will ever be considered a bigger bust than Ryan Leaf. But even Ryan Leaf was given 2 full seasons.
Yeah. It's tough. I feel bad for Bryce. I hope he figures it out. But right now, it's tough sledding for him. And our second Dynasty Faller, he hasn't been terrible. But based off where he probably went in your Dynasty drafts and your expectations for him, Trevor Lawrence, I think, has been pretty disappointing to start the season here. He's the QB 22 right now. He's only scored 24.6 points so far this year. And they've been pretty disappointing performances. If you've watched any of the Jaguars games, they just don't look good. Christian Kirk seems like he forgot how to catch a ball. Brian Thomas has really been the only bright spot in that offense. And even then, Lawrence has had issues where he's still overthrowing people a little bit. He just doesn't look extremely accurate.
Yep.
And, based on when you're taking him in Dynasty, you probably drafted him as a top 8, top 10 QB in your league, depending on how things kind of fell out. And he's just not performing that way. That said, I do think that the Jaguars might be looking at a new coaching staff in the next 30 to 60 days or so, so maybe something changes there. But right now, he's just continued to kind of slide down Dynasty rankings.
Yeah, Lawrence is young. We saw what he was capable of 2 years ago when he was really good. And then he started to fall last year and into this year. It hasn't been a great start, not a terrible start like you mentioned. But the Jags as a whole just don't look like they have an identity. And that's the alarming piece. Like the offense has been kind of scattered. whenever you're constantly moving people in and out of play, it causes problems for people to get into a rhythm. Like I'm watching Tank. Well, granted, Tank Bigsby got hurt. Bigsby and ETN alternating drives like all over the place. The wide receivers, like you said, Christian Kirk is not catching anything. Brian Thomas has looked decent, but Trevor Lawrence hasn't really been given this. And they also lost Ingram this past week, which definitely is not a good thing for him because he's definitely been the safety valve for Lawrence when it comes to who he's going to throw it to. But it's a situation where it just hasn't been good. They've looked shaky, and it kind of feels like Lawrence on the field feels like he's got to make decisions he doesn't want to make because he doesn't have a choice because that's what's being given to him. And also I think they're in another situation where the offensive line is just not so great as well. It seems to be like a common trend where I'm watching some of these games where the quarterbacks are just running for their life a lot of the game, and that's never going to work. It's actually kind of interesting. I think the top teams are the teams that their OL can actually hold up.
Yeah, no, and this week they're going up against Buffalo, so there's a chance he puts up another rough performance.
Yep.
He's someone I might target as like a buy low, especially in super flex formats.
Yep.
And one QB I'm less interested, but in super flex, if you can get him cheap, if you have like a guy like Darnold or Fields where you can package with a pick and move up and get Lawrence, I would be pretty interested in a move like that. You just have to see how panicked the owner of Lawrence is in your league right now, I think.
Yeah, he sits on my bench anyway in the league I have him, so I prefer my Lamar Jackson. Let's jump into running backs. For running backs, we're going to give you 3 risers and fallers. I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of like what you're looking at when you're getting them. Our first riser shouldn't really be much of a surprise. And one thing I do want to highlight here, when we're looking at more so running backs and wide receivers and tight ends, we're definitely taking age more into an account when we're picking some of these people. I don't want you guys to come and argue with me why we don't have Kamara on this list. We love what Kamara has done at the beginning of the season. Trust me, I do. But he's also old. So if you're in a dynasty, he's not really someone you're going to go after to be starting a dynasty. Right? Unless you really, really have to and you're getting him in like a late round. Or maybe you're making a push for a championship. Then there might be a reason to go grab him for the season. But if you're thinking long term, he's not really going to be a focus. So with that in mind, these people that we picked here are right in the prime of their running back career. And we're starting with, who looks healthy right now, J.K. Dobbins. He's put up 43 points on the season in fantasy. And the biggest thing, it's been with a split timeshare with Gus Bus, who has clearly not looked nearly as good as J.K. Dobbins has. And one of the things that I wanted to bring into an account here is like he's only been out there for 52% of the snaps. So he's doing that with like half the log of being on the field. And he's leading almost the majority of the running backs in points. Not all the running backs, but the majority of them. I'm pretty sure Kamara trumps almost all the running backs in points just from this past week.
Yeah, no, Dobbins has looked really good. Obviously, if you have him, you are just praying that he stays healthy. Because he came out of Ohio State and he was a super talented running back. There were a lot of high hopes for him in Baltimore, and he just, injury after injury, just couldn't, stay on the field. He looks great. We knew that Jim Harbaugh was going to come into Los Angeles and just, run the ball down people's throats. And as long as Dobbins is healthy, I think he has potential to finish as a top 12 RB this season.
Yeah, he's looked really good. He's been fun to watch. Our next one is not one that someone probably teed up to be someone that's rising, but he's looked good in his efficiency, and that's Brian Robinson Jr. on the Commanders. The Commanders have been kind of just interesting to watch. They're kind of fun to watch because it's like watching a dumpster fire that's slowly putting the fire out. But Brian Robinson's is sitting at 32.5 points, and he's been out there for 58% of the snaps. So clearly Eckler is still getting some of the carries, and Eckler's looked good too. But we know he didn't want to be the bell cow. He wanted to, he's getting up there in age at this point, which has made him look fresh when he's on the field. And Brian Robinson has reaped the benefits. He's looked good. He's averaging more than 15 points a game, which is really a sweet spot that you want to look at when you have an RB2. That's what you want. If you get RB2 that's giving you 15 points a game, you got a good RB2.
Yeah, and I think playing Brian Robinson is going to be a little bit matchup based because if the Commanders are not winning, and I don't think they're going to be leading in most of their games coming up, where they have Cincinnati, Arizona, Cleveland, then Baltimore. So there might be a rough stretch coming up here. It could open a buy low period here. Robinson's going to be really good in close games or games where they're running the ball. So they play the Giants again, so you have that going for you. They have Carolina in their schedule this year. There are some really good games for Brian Robinson. I don't know if he's a week in, week out player, but especially for that final flex spot, if you play the matchups, I think he can be really valuable.
Well, once you get into the bye weeks, he's inevitably going to be a flex spot play. Our last one he's definitely been surprising for me. He's had a really good season so far, and that's Ramondre Stevenson. On the Pats, he's got 38.6 fantasy points. He is playing a ton. He is I forget who the other one is, one of two running backs that have commanded all of the runs. That says a lot because it's so rare that you see that. Off the top of my head, I couldn't even tell you who the Patriots' other running back is. So that says itself. He's been out there for 75% of the snaps. That's a lot. And it just shows the trust that the Patriots have in him. And with Belichick not there, he's just he's enjoying given the opportunity to actually run the ball, which has been really good.
Yeah. I mean, Antonio Gibson's the backup there in New England, and he did have a good game in week 2.
He did,
had
that's true.
Explosive runs. I don't necessarily think he's going to eat into Ramondre's role this year, but he's a good handcuff to have, Antonio Gibson, I think. The Patriots' defense is going to keep games closer than people expect, I think. Even though their offense outside of Ramondre Stevenson and Hunter Henry is awful right now.
Yeah, it's definitely been anemic.
They're just going to have to give him volume. And the games will be close enough where they don't just have to air it out. So,
yeah. I expect I don't expect Jacoby Brissett to be holding on to that starting job through the entire season. I'll be very surprised. Fallers. Let's get into these guys real quick. This one should not be surprising at all, and that's DeAndre Swift. He's got 13.2. I mean, the Bears' OL looks like hot garbage from every perspective. So judging him and Caleb has been really tough because they're not really getting a chance to do much of anything back there. But he's been out there for about 68% of the snap share, and he just can't get anything going. He had a few catches this past week where he looked like he was getting some motor going. He definitely got some yards, which was good to see. But overall, from a dynasty perspective, he's sitting at 25 years old. He's definitely falling. Every single running back that we have listed here is either 25 or 26. And he's definitely one of the ones that I would be leery of picking up behind an O-line that isn't the Eagles, which is it's starting to show like why he was as good as he was last year. It's because he was stacked behind the top line.
Yeah, no, it just goes back to if you have a bad O-line and you have a bad offense, you're going to have a hard time being fantasy relevant. And that's for QBs, running backs, wide receivers. It's in a really bad offense with a bad O-line, you're going to struggle. And I think that's a product of what's happening right now with Swift. Nothing's going to change in the next couple of weeks where that's really going to shift around a lot, and he's all of a sudden going to be this explosive monster.
Yeah.
If you can get some value for him right now, still bundle him in a trade, I'd be looking to move him, frankly, in most league formats if I could find a willing buyer. Yeah.
The next one that we have on our list is Rachaad White. And the thing to carry with Rachaad White is he hasn't been terrible. He's had about 20 points this season, which, believe it or not, is not like a lot of running backs are kind of lagging behind when it comes to the fantasy point side of things. But he hasn't looked good. He rushed 10 times this past week for like 18 yards or 20 yards, I forget. It was not very good. And he's out there for 70% of the snaps. He had one catch for 5 yards. I know he wasn't targeted a ton, but it just doesn't seem like the offense is getting him in the ball in good situations, where last year he was thriving off of checkdowns and being able to run the ball down the field after a short pass. He doesn't seem to be getting that as much this year, probably because Chris Godwin's eating a lot of that, which has been really beneficial for him as he's had a really good start to the season. But that means Rachaad White is falling. He's only 25 years old. It could be a buy low opportunity on his point. People might be looking to move on from him. But the jury's going to be still out how he's going to pan out this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, I personally am passing on buying Rachaad White. A lot of the concerns coming into the season were how inefficient he was, and really he was just buoyed by all those like quick checkdowns and just the volume he was given last year. And we've already seen in small sample sizes, Bucky Irving's been a more efficient runner behind the same offensive line than Rachaad White. And I don't think Irving's some special prospect that's going to be a workhorse back in this league either. But he might just eat into enough of Rachaad White's volume where neither are really startable fantasy assets. And that's my biggest concern with the Buccaneers backfield right now.
Yeah, so unless you're stuck with him, it would not be someone I would be intentionally starting unless I have to, until I see a change. The last one that I have here, it could probably just lump them together, and that's the Steelers' backfield. But I have Najee Harris listed here, who, quite frankly, didn't look good last year either. I was down on him last year, and people thought he was going to pick it back up this year. I know we're only 2 weeks in. The sample size is still not great, and Pittsburgh as a whole, their offense is atrocious. From the quarterback play to the running back play is not looked good. George Pickens is the only bright spot in that, and he's kind of floating to the best of his ability because Justin Fields is the quarterback. He's got 17.3 points. He's sitting at 26 years old, and he's out there for about 51% of the snaps, which is a decent amount of snaps for him, being he's split in the backfield with Jaylen Warren. But he just has looked inefficient across the board. Just like he looked like he's just not churning out yards the way you would want a true RB1 to be operating. And I think that is really the alarming part as you watch him. It's tough to see because he's not getting it done. He's actually negative on rushing yards over expected, which is not a good line to have for any running back. You don't want to be negative. You should always be positive when you're a running back. But he's spending more time in the backfield than he is getting past the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, and I think with Harris, the Steelers are so bad. I don't know how many goal line opportunities he's going to have this year to punch in touchdowns, which is really the only way he can save his fantasy value. Warren is the obvious passing down back in Pittsburgh, and he's a guy I'd rather have rest of season, kind of fully working back from that preseason injury that he had. I think Warren is going to be I'm not too excited about Warren either, but if I had to pick between him and Harris, he's the more exciting back right now. Pittsburgh, again, one of those teams, you're probably trying to avoid them for fantasy purposes right now, though.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and to jump into our wide receivers for this, the first stud wide receiver that we have, this is a guy, he went pretty early in most drafts, probably late third, early fourths. Nico Collins is our biggest dynasty riser this year so far. He's sitting right now as the wide receiver, I think it's 2 or 3. Wide receiver 2. He scored 45.2 points so far this year. He's 25 years old. He's done that so far off of 14 receptions, 282 yards, and a touchdown. And he is tied to one of the best young QBs in the league, in C.J. Stroud right now as well. He's got everything going for him. He's the clear number one in this offense. Diggs and Dell seem to be in a competition of their own right now, whereas Collins is the clear alpha target in Houston. I think that's going to continue. He's beaten zone coverage. He's really good against press coverage. There's really not a lot defenses can throw at Nico Collins where he doesn't succeed. Yep. And I just think we're going to see volume, touchdowns, and yards come his way. I think he's a top 10 wide receiver in this league, and that's going to continue to trend in that direction.
Yeah, I think what you see from him already this season, if drafts were happening, he would be already sitting in top 5 wide receivers taken. Easy, because he's just looked that good on the field. He looked fantastic this week. He looked great last week. And he's, like you said, he's got C.J. Stroud as his quarterback. And he's just on a really good offense. Diggs and Dell fighting for whatever they're doing are both receivers in their own right that are good. And then they have Joe Mixon as the running back. It's a really, really strong offense with a really good quarterback that can get the ball and spread the field. I don't see Nico Collins falling back anywhere, and it's really hard to believe that. I think it was this time last year people were going, oh, crap, I got to add Nico Collins.
Yeah, no, he reminds me of Andre Johnson. That's exactly, I think, his comp, and I think he's going to have a similar career from this point on. I love Nico. If there's any way you could buy him, I'd do it, even if it feels like a bit of an overpay right now based off like trade calculators, whatever. If you can get him on your team, I am trying to buy him right now. Mm-hmm. And our second Dynasty riser, this is probably the oldest wide receiver we have on this list, but it's been a huge resurgence year for him so far, is Chris Godwin. We already mentioned Baker Mayfield, so we won't take too long on this one. But Godwin moved back to his role as a slot wide receiver, and we've already seen a huge uptick in targets, receptions, and yardage for him. Mm-hmm. He also has 2 touchdowns to go on the year so far, so he's incorporated in that red zone offense for the Bucs too. He just looks like he's the go-to guy for Baker Mayfield in most situations. Obviously, Mike Evans is going to have his big days as well in this offense, but in terms of consistent volume, I think Godwin might be the guy to own in Tampa Bay right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at targeted air yards as a metric, for those of you that don't know what that means, is like it's how often the ball is like the distance is thrown in the air at the receivers and the percentage that a receiver is taking of those air yards. So if I'm a quarterback and I throw for 100 yards, if 40 of those yards go to Chris Godwin, he's commanding 40% of the targeted air yards. He's sitting right now at 36.4%. And if you look at numbers over time, this is actually lower than Mike Evans, by the way. Because Mike Evans had a really, really good week one. He's seeing at 42%. This number will come down as the season progresses. But usually if you see a receiver that's floating in the 30 to 35% of the target share, it's a very strong indicator that they are going to perform really well. To give you like an anomaly, someone who's not on our list right now, Malik Neighbors is commanding 56% of the target share on the Giants, which is an extraordinarily high number of air yards overall. So Chris Godwin sitting, if he can maintain that 35-ish percent, 30%, he's just going to continue to be milking and eating and giving fantasy points to everybody.
Yeah. And, Neighbors, obviously, he was drafted pretty high in Dynasty leagues already. So while his value certainly increased and we're big fans of Neighbors, we just didn't think the change in value was as high for him as someone like Godwin or our next guy who is Jameson Williams. And if you've drafted Jameson Williams in Dynasty, you have been patiently waiting, 1 year on the IR for most of it. Last year he had the gambling suspension and was just kind of eased back in. Idiot. And you've just been holding and praying that he would eventually kind of turn it around and break out. There was a lot of hype coming out of Lions camp this offseason that Jameson kind of fixed his drop issue. He's being used on more routes. He's more of a grown-up, more mature. That's basically the biggest thing that we saw with him. And so far this year, he hasn't disappointed. He's in the top 5 this year in number of targets. He currently has 20 targets this year from Jared Goff, and he's turned it into 10 receptions, 200 yards, and a touchdown. And we just know he's capable of busting out big plays. He could rip off a 40, 50-yard touchdown run just out of really thin air. So he might be a little boom or bust, but if his volume stays this high in terms of target and receptions, he could be one of those staples in your lineup week in and week out, given a few more weeks of this kind of volume there.
Well, yeah, and you got to take into account how crazy his yards after catch have been. Like, he's been catching that ball in stride. I will say that the one thing I like to see for him is watching that catch rate go up. A 50% catch clip is not great. When you look at Godwin, who's on the complete opposite of like almost 94% catch rate, which is an anomaly in itself. But seeing at 50%, I would like to see that number come up. But in either case, watching a wide receiver who has been riding most people's benches the last few years due to injury and stupidity, it's nice to see him get his chance, and he's been really, really fun to watch, which is what people expected on the Detroit offense. Him and Amon-Ra have looked great, and getting what was his name, Josh Reynolds, out of there and out of his way has really benefited him.
Yeah. And I think part of that catch rate being low right now, too, is Jared Goff has looked awful.
Yeah.
He's still throwing a lot, so there's been enough volume, but he just has not been very accurate or the normal Jared Goff that we've seen over the past year. So hopefully that improves and that whole offense, like Laporta desperately needs a good game.
Yeah.
I think that offense will improve as the season goes on. And our last big riser in Dynasty for the wide receiver is going to be Rashee Rice. He was just a faller this offseason due to some of the off-the-field issues.
Yep.
Obviously, he's facing some felony counts here and probably a big suspension coming along with that whenever the court system kind of catches up there. But as of right now, it seems like he's good to play for the year. And he's off to a monster start with Patrick Mahomes. He scored 35.8 points so far this year. And that's off 12 receptions, 178 yards, and a touchdown. He's right now, he's the go-to guy in the Chiefs offense, which is someone who I definitely want to own. He's used, pretty much in all scenarios there. He's not really leaving the field. And while Kelsey is declining, and we'll touch on that a bit later, I think Rice is the guy who's going to benefit and kind of take over a lot of that target share from before.
I mean, he's really been it on that team through the first two games. Obviously, Worthy had a decent first game, but didn't do much of anything in the second game. Rashee Rice is the one who ate this past week. Kelsey did a whole lot of nothing, as Sam said, so we'll get into him in a bit. So he's been the one that's been commanding the offense. And with Pacheco going down, most likely with Carson Steele stepping in now, undrafted free agent rookie coming in as the running back, I would suspect that they're probably going to throw the ball even more than they have been. And Rashee Rice is going to be the one to reap those benefits the most. It's really interesting to see it. I expect his target share to go up. He's been sitting at 36% of the air yards. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that rise into the 40s this week. He's looked really good. He's just looked quick, which is something that you're just going to look for in a receiver. And he's catching 80% of his passes.
Yeah.
What more could you ask for in anybody that you would draft?
Yeah, basically just got a fingers crossed, that suspension does not come this year. But that might be a reason if the manager in your league who currently owns him is nervous about that, maybe he's still willing to sell him at a discount. And you're going to miss time with him at some point. It's probably next season though. Just be aware of that when you go by. But this year he could help you for rebuilders, for contenders. He seems to be a great asset to him.
Yeah.
And for our first faller, this was the wide receiver 6 last year in PPR formats. But it's just been a disappointing start for the whole offense in Chicago here. And DJ Moore is our first faller. This is not so much an issue of DJ Moore getting worse, I don't think. Mm-hmm. It's just that whole offense in Chicago looks anemic right now, and I don't see it getting any better in the near future. I won't drag on Chicago too much again here, but their O-line's bad. Caleb doesn't have time to throw. He's still working out some of the kinks, kind of getting building chemistry with DJ and Allen and Odunze and Kmet. So I'm just kind of leaving him out of my starting lineup for the time being.
Yeah, there's really not much to add. It's a shame. Chicago really, everyone expected them to come out. And I don't think Keenan Allen not being on the field was that much of a change. It shouldn't have that much of an impact. I know he helps open up the field a little bit, but it just feels like Caleb's running for his life on every play. And if you're a receiver in that situation, you're going to struggle. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be Tyreek Hill. If your quarterback's busy running for his life the entire time, you're not going to get the ball. And you're not going to be able to do what you are there to do.
Yeah. That said, I do expect Caleb Williams to improve as the season goes on. I would expect, maybe not quickly, but hopefully by the end of the the season here, there's a little bit of a better connection. Chicago's not as bad as they are right now. So he could be an interesting buy low. He's still only 27 years old. He's going to be the wide receiver one in this offense, I think, for the next couple of years here. So if you have a contender in your league who has him, who's willing to move off him for maybe like a guy like Ridley or someone like that who's performing right now, these are kind of moves I would try to make right now in your dynasty. As far as a guy I'm not so sure I would buy low at this stage, just due to his QB situation, Michael Pittman. This was a guy I was kind of high on going into the season. He was a PPR monster last year, finishing as a wide receiver 13. And again, it was mostly just due to a super high volume of passes from Gardner Minshew, and he was getting like 10, 12 catches like most weeks there at the end. And Anthony Richardson is his QB now. And Anthony Richardson doesn't complete a lot of passes or even make that many attempts. So I just don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant as long as Richardson's his QB. Maybe Richardson improves as a passer as the year goes on, but I don't say that with a lot of confidence. Josh Downs hasn't even been on the field for the first 2 weeks of the season, and word out of camp is he is Anthony Richardson's favorite target. I think the situation could get worse for Pittman. I don't want to tell people to sell low, but if you can get decent value for him, it might be your last chance to do so.
Yeah, I feel bad for the guy because he's in a similar situation to what DJ Moore's running into, where the offense is just not in a good place for him to succeed. As a whole, Anthony Richardson is completing 50% of his passes back-to-back weeks. And that is awful. Like, it's not good. If you're completing 50%, I mean, the bar is usually like you want to be in the 60s at least if you're a quarterback. 50s are low. If you're below 50, you're absolute trash. It's not good. Now, it's only 2 weeks in. He just got back from being injured. Richardson could still be shaking off some rust in his own right after missing pretty much all of last year. So we don't want to jump to too many conclusions, but right now Pittman is in a situation where he could be in a buy high scenario or a buy low scenario because people are like, oh, he's not doing anything for me. I'm going to get rid of this trash. And then Richardson figures it out and gets it together. And we see things snap back into place, and now you got an asset that you got on sale. Because we know what Pittman's capable of. He showed it last year. Just like Moore did last year. And if those things flip, each of them are going to end up becoming really good assets right now that are sitting on the floor that might be easy to pick them up if you choose to.
Yeah, Pittman I think is tough. I still kind of lean towards I'm not sure the situation gets much better this year just because of how Richardson is as a passer, even just coming into the NFL. And you know, Alec Pierce seems like a big target of his. I think Downs is going to eat into that target share. I just don't see this situation. Maybe it stabilizes. Maybe he gets 7, 8, 9 points a week, but I don't think he's going to give you what you're hoping for when you drafted him.
Yeah, he definitely likes hurling it down the field. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, and Pittman's not a deep guy, so it doesn't really match up well. But
it's funny, like if you look at the quarterbacks and you look at like their average intended air yards, he is only behind Trevor Lawrence in intended air yards average. He's at 12. If you're averaging a 12-yard pass as your average intended, like that's far. Most passes are completed between the 1 and the 5, or honestly behind the line of scrimmage to the 1. That's where a lot of passes are completed. It's once you start seeing numbers going up that high, the numbers just start to fall off. Like even if you look at people like Patrick Mahomes, most of his passes are in the 1 to 5, maybe 5 to 10, which is very, very common. To have an average over 10, if you look at quarterbacks right now, which is really funny as I'm looking at this, if you look at quarterbacks that are kind of struggling, you have Will Levis at 10.2, Anthony Richardson at 12, Trevor Lawrence at 12.2. They're the only three. Oh, and Kyler Murray. But Kyler Murray's been able to get away with it because he's been really good. They're the only 3 there that are actually over 10, which is wild. So you'll probably see a regression to the mean where they come back into the 5 to 10 range. But when your quarterback's just whipping it down the field, they're looking for the big play, you're going to see a lot of incompletions. And like you said, Michael Pittman is definitely more of a mid to short range receiver.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I think I'm avoiding right now. But
Yeah.
speaking of our next guy, who's also just kind of been disappointing based off where you drafted him, is Garrett Wilson. I think this guy is a buy low. I do really like Garrett. He's obviously super talented. He's only 24 years old, but he just hasn't had a great connection with Aaron Rodgers so far. Like, he's made some really good plays with Aaron Rodgers, but he's not getting the volume that I think we were hoping he would get this year. Rodgers is still spreading the ball around to Lazard a lot. Breece Hall is getting on targets out of the backfield. Mike Williams even had a few catches last week, I believe.
He should.
I think Garrett Wilson is going to improve as the season goes on here, but it's been a disappointing start. And if you have a manager in your league who is willing to move on from him and you can get him for a little bit of a discount, might not be great, might not be a huge discount. I think he's worth going after right now.
Well, it's interesting because he is commanding passes. He's at 42% of the intended air yards on the team. That's a pretty high number. So he's got 17 targets, which is more targets than, I'm not going to say A.J. Brown because he was out, more targets than Calvin Ridley. It's more targets than Marvin Harrison Jr. It's more targets than Waddle. It's tied with CeeDee Lamb. He's on the high end in terms of targets, but the thing is like, he's sitting at a 59% catch rate. He's got 10 catches on 17 targets, which tells me the ball is just not getting to him because Wilson, we know, is going to catch that ball, right? He's going to be that guy that's going to – he made whoever was QB last year look somewhat presentable when the ball was thrown to him somehow. So I think it's just a matter of time before they click, but he's definitely had a slow start to fantasy season because of this. And I think some of it does tie into Rodgers just being he'll be the first one to tell you, shaking off a bit of rust these first few games.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just the connection with Rodgers has to improve a little bit there.
Yeah.
If you can get him, absolutely go for it. I think he will be a riser down the stretch here, but it's been a disappointing start for him.
Yep.
And our last receiver, really quick, you won't spend too much time on this guy because neither should you, is Terry McLaurin. This was probably the last chance for Terry McLaurin to reclaim some form of fantasy relevance. I was really hoping with Jaden Daniels and a new coaching staff that he might kind of turn it back around and be a wide receiver, low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 again. Mm-hmm. But he just hasn't. Jaden Daniels has not proven to be a fantastic passer of the football. He doesn't look bad, but he's running in most situations. And as a result, McLaurin is the 63rd wide receiver right now with only 8 receptions off of 12 targets and like 39 total yards right now.
And the 39 yards says it all. They're all short. Like when you're averaging a scenario where you're getting like 5 to 6 yards per pass and you're just getting hit like right away, which is what he's running into, it's just not good. They're check down passes. And you're seeing the same thing with Zach Ertz, who's had a little bit of a resurgence this year, which has been really good because I love Ertz. But he's run into the same thing. It's just short passes. And Daniels hasn't really let the ball loose. And it's hurting Terry, which isn't surprising.
Yeah, no, just avoid players in bad offenses for the most part. And he's an aging guy too, so I don't know how much value McLaurin's going to hold by the end of the season.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to say when it comes down to it because it's just a situation that he is in that I think is bringing him down a little bit. But yeah, like you say, he's getting a little older. He's at 29 years old now. We'll see if Jaden Daniels starts airing the ball out and they actually let it loose because we know he's got the arm for it. He's got a cannon, actually, which they have not allowed him to really just go out there and do yet. So we'll see what happens. I'm excited to see what happens for the Commanders, even though they're a division rival. I like seeing young offenses start to click and get things together. All right, moving on. We'll keep these ones quick because they're tight ends and they're useless. Tight end position has been, outside of like just a few people, it's been pretty much a trash compactor. But let's start with the risers, and this one probably is not surprising at all for anybody who's been watching football. It's Brock Bowers. Bowers, in the small sample that we have, has looked everything that has been sold on him so far. He looks like what people thought Pitts was going to be when he came into the league. And he can block. And he's only 21. He's young. To put that in perspective, like Laporta is 23. So he was older than Bowers when he came to the league last year. 30.6 points. He's out there for almost 70% of the snaps. So you could tell Las Vegas relies on him. And Minshew is utilizing him all over the field, which has been really, really fun to watch. Surprisingly, they haven't been boring to watch, which has been kind of nice because Adams has looked good too to start the season. But Brock Bowers has been everything that has been sold so far. And if you can get him, but you probably can't, I would be very surprised if anybody would let him go right now. But if you can get him, it'd be great. If you're starting your draft next year in a Dynasty League, he would be already after week 2, probably the tight end I'd be targeting at the first stage if I'm looking for a tight end.
Yeah, I mean, I just floated the idea of trading you Laporta. I have Laporta. To trade you Laporta for Bowers straight up, and the answer was hell no.
Didn't even consider it. It took like a second.
And I've got Bowers in the league. You have Bowers in the league. I think he's on a trajectory, at least value-wise, to be the Dynasty tight end 1 by the end of this year. Yep. That I don't think is an unfair exaggeration. I think it's going to be him, Laporta, and McBride that we see kind of in that group at the top, assuming Laporta turns it around a little bit here. There's not a lot of tight ends with a lot of value, but he is one of them.
Yep. Yeah, he's been outstanding. And the next one that we have for you is someone who's been off to a really good start. Honestly, probably would be better if a touchdown that should have been a touchdown, because the NFL even said it should have been a touchdown, and it didn't get called back. He'd be sitting up higher too, and that's Mike Gesicki. He's looked really good on the Bengals over there. He's being utilized. He's only been out there for like 42% of snap share, but the guy is sitting at 21 fantasy points, and he would be almost at Brock Bowers' 30 fantasy points if he had that touchdown. He's looked young. He's looked strong, and no, I'm not biased because he's a Penn State guy, but it's been fun to watch him get a little bit of a resurgence these first 2 games over on the Bengals. And in a lot of leagues, he's probably on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I mean, tight end has just been a position Cincinnati just hasn't filled for past 3 or 4 years, really. I think he'll be used a lot in the pass game. My concern for him is he's not on the field all the time because he's not a blocking tight end.
Yeah.
So he'll have some bad weeks, but for his price and value right now, I think he's worth picking up or trading like a 3rd or 4th rounder for him if you're really desperate at the tight end position.
Yeah, right now with how tight ends are performing, you're going to want to take a chance on someone who might actually give you something because it's abysmal. Which leads us into the fallers and why Sam tried to do that trade. Sam Laporta is one of the fallers. He has been off to a super slow start, which is fascinating. And part of that is because Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams are hogging all the air yards and the target share when it comes down to it. But he's sitting at 11.8 points after week 2, which I don't think there's a single person that is in fantasy football would have told you that he'd be at less than 20 going into week 3. It's very surprising. And the thing is like he's out there all the time. He's sitting out there on snap share at 84.2%. Which means he's out there for almost 9 out of 10 snaps. And that's more than Brock and Mike. So it says a lot. Obviously, I expect Laporta to turn it around. But these first 2 weeks have been rough. And it could be an opportunity where someone just might try to trade him for someone else. Unfortunately, it's for a player that is above him.
Yeah. No, I mean, a part of this is there's a lot of mouths to feed in Detroit now. You have
Yeah.
J-Mo, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gibbs gets a lot of volume as well. I think the biggest issue is Goff has been terrible. I think that's really what it comes down to. He's passed the ball a lot, but he's not been accurate, even in like short range passes. Like I was watching the game against the Bucks, and there was a screen pass out to Gibbs, and he could have completed it to him. It should have been a fairly easy pass, and he just threw it into the dirt for whatever reason. And we've seen a lot of just inaccurate passes, not really even looking Laporta's way. I think that changes. I don't know what's going on with him, but I don't think he's going to be this bad the rest of the season.
Well, what's really interesting is Goff is currently 4th in the league in total yards thrown. So, total yards. But a lot of that, I think, is because of what his receivers have done with the ball after they've caught it. His range's not good. Like you said, he's looked not great behind that line and making good decisions and getting the ball out. He's sitting at a 1-to-3 touchdown to interception ratio, which is not something you ever want to sit in. Negative TD to interception ratio. So it's been a very, very, very rough start for Goff. And the thing is like, once Goff figures it out, which I think he will, gets his things together, that offense is going to be ridiculous, especially with Jameson Williams coming on. Last faller, is this the year where we just start to see it just implode? Granted, this isn't someone that you should be targeting heavily in Dynasty anyway because he's older, but that's Travis Kelce. He's sitting at 8 fantasy points. I think he had, 1.6 this past week, something like that, which was just not good in any sense of the word. I have him only on one of my teams because I drafted him years ago. And he's been fantastic, obviously. Everyone knows how good Kelce has been. He's out there for 90% of the snaps. It blows my mind that he has not received more targets and more balls. But I think it's also part of, like, if you look at the Chiefs as a whole, is they really haven't been completing a ton of passes down the field on a consistent basis yet. We'll see. Time will tell. If you look at Mahomes right now, he's sitting at like QB 15 in terms of yards thrown, which is, I think, the most interesting thing that we could say about this is with 2 high safeties being like ran on like every single defense at this point, it's made it a lot harder for quarterbacks to air the ball out. And what was it? Our buddy Joe, who has only shown up for one video on this channel, he sent us a message yesterday showing the touchdowns, right? And he gave us the count of the last 5 years and the total touchdowns that were thrown through the first 2 weeks. And I got them right here in front of us. In 2019, the first 2 weeks, there was 105. 2020, 110. 2021, 110. 2022, 105. 2023, 86. And 2024, now this did not include last night's game, we were at 66. So I think after last night's game, we're at what, 68 or 69?
I think it was just London and Barkley. Yeah, so 68, I think.
Yeah, so there was 2 catches yesterday, right? No, it was Mooney too.
Yeah, so 60.
So there's 3. So it was 69. And that's like absolutely wild. That's a 40 TD fall off in 2 years almost. And it just shows you how things have evolved as a whole, that it's just getting tougher to, and you've seen in some of our other videos where we're talking about the total fantasy points that are coming out week over week. It's lower across the board because the offenses are not able to do what they were doing. Now, this will change. It always does. Offenses will adjust. They'll learn to manage through the 2 safeties, and then defenses will adjust. This is what happens. And every single season of the NFL, like when the Wildcat became popular for a period of time, and defenses adjusted, and then it became garbage.
Yeah, no, I definitely a lot of adjustments in the NFL, and we kind of got off the Kelce topic a little bit there.
Yeah,
but,
that's all right, though.
no, and, with Kelce, he's old. He's 35. And
34.
34?
He's 34 still.
Whatever, he's old. For NFL.
I resent that. I'm 38.
Well, you're old, too. I wouldn't draft you in my fantasy league either. Yeah, but the Chiefs, and we saw it last year too, they're going to save Kelsey for the postseason.
Yeah.
They don't want him to get banged up or get injured in the regular season. It's not worth it for him. The Chiefs are going to win games without him this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets fairly minimal usage throughout the regular season just to go off in the playoffs and maybe Super Bowl run. But for now, I don't think he's going to be really fantasy relevant, or at least not as fantasy relevant as he used to be for the rest of the regular season here.
Yeah. Time will tell. I think he's going to end up finishing middle of the road. I'll be surprised if he's still not a top 10 tight end by the end of the year. But by top 10, I mean you're looking at him at like 9, 8, 10 when it comes down to it. The new guys, Brock, Laporta, McBride, and so on, are going to be the ones that you see, I think, eating the majority of that when it comes down to it. But yeah, I think we've gone through enough of these. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
All right. So thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope you guys enjoyed this. Obviously, if anything comes to mind and things you want to share, did we miss anybody? Someone that you would place in as a riser or a faller that we missed? I mean, we might honestly agree with you. We just didn't want to list 100 different people because we would have been here longer than what we've already been here for. But we appreciate you taking the time, and we hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.